Hey everybody, I'm Taylor, and welcome to the Sheepish Goat. Today we're going to talk about this guy.
Well, it's really nice to meet you, Mr. Dog. That's right.
His name's Gruff, and he's the co-host of my show, Fictitious Mockery. Today we're starting a new series called Making a Mockery, and I'm going to show you just how I made him. So stay tuned. Alright, so this is the first episode in a Making a Mockery series. I'm pretty excited about this. I'm going to break down how I've made the show Fictitious Mockery, which, yes, I know really technically only has one episode, but don't focus on that too much because there's more coming, I promise. But I really was excited to be able to break down some of the processes because there's been a lot of things I learned in making this character and making this video. You don't need to watch that as a prerequisite. This is basically going to go through the process of how I made the character, how I've rigged him, how I've made him an animatable character that I can use to puppet and voice act through and animate and all kinds of fun stuff. So if you're interested in that, or if you just think the process might be fun to learn how to do, even if you won't do it yourself, then stay tuned because we're going to get into it. But I think the first interesting or most important thing to talk about is how the character developed. I made the channel The Sheepish Goat, and in doing so, I knew I would have kind of a goat character, but I thought it would just be a sort of a symbol of the channel, if you will. Like it was a manifestation, but not really like a full-on mascot who would talk and things to that effect. So I made this drawing right here. This is a goat character who's got glasses. It was representative of these blue light glasses that I will often wear when I stare at screens for a long time because of the blue light. But he's got that, he's got a pencil. Very basic. He is literally just a goat. I guess the takeaway for him, though, is that he has a little bit of color splotching. So he's got some variance in color. And yes, that's true for most goats, but sometimes they'll be all black or all white. So that's kind of the basis for how Gruff started. From there, he turned into this. This is the rough intro animation that I'll play, and I'll overlay it here so you can see it. But this is the rough intro animation of a goat character dragging the word goat that I use for my intro. And it's only a 3-second loop. Took a lot of work, and I've got a video on how I made this animation on the channel. So check it out if you haven't done so, because that was a big undertaking and some good information if you're just curious on how that process works. So that was how all the basis started. So as you would have just seen in the intro for this video, Gruff was directly inspired by the goat I used for my intro that says the sheepish goat. He is the goat pulling along. So when I decided to make an actual character out of Gruff, I used that as my inspiration. I took the colors and the general form language of that character and made it into an animatable puppet. So how I did that was with this original sketch that I did in Procreate. So I'll play that time lapse and we'll kind of go over it. So as you can see, I directly took the head from the puppet. I then knew I wanted him in a sitting pose with gesturable arms. We'll get into Character Animator, which is the program I use to actually animate this character, in a little bit. But I knew there were a few things I wanted. I knew I wanted him to see it sitting down. I knew I wanted his arms to be able to extend. So variable arms. And once you get into animating, arms in certain positions are better for animation. So that is a factor. But other than that, it was pretty simple. I just wanted to get him into a sitting pose, so I had to rework his body. In the actual original animation, his neck was pretty long. I left it long proportionally, but I've shortened it here for the sake of the character to be more uniform. He also is very rotund in the middle because he's eaten a lot of grass, I guess, and I slimmed him down quite a bit. I actually continued to elongate him even through like kind of the first two videos Gruff appears in, and we'll go over that in a little bit here. But as you can see, I'm roughing out the character here. And I'm just getting colors applied to certain areas to make sure it's all matching and trying to get the base proportions down. I wanted to retain the collar because I knew that'd be a nice color contrast as far as the oranges against the greens, basically. I knew that would look nice. And that was basically the gist of how Gruff came together from the original until then. This process here took quite a while, making Gruff, and in actual making him into an animatable puppet, or a rig, as many people will say. It kind of just depends on the program you're using. But in the process of doing that, he obviously evolved further. So as I said, this was in Procreate. And in Procreate, I got him to an extent. The problem is that once you use Character Animator, which is an Adobe product, Procreate is not an Adobe drawing software. Photoshop is an Adobe drawing software. Now, Procreate works with Photoshop files, PSD files. And when you load a PSD file into there, if you're using Adobe licensed software, then it will retain memory. For example, I could export Gruff, the actual character of Gruff, the drawn file, from Procreate. But when I do that, it will export it and modify it into a PSD file if I choose. The problem is that it's not doing that natively, so it's not retaining the memory with it. What does all of that mean? In Photoshop, when I export a PSD file character, that is native, and it retains every alteration you do. Now, what that means is that if I want to update something on a file, I can upload it to Character Animator, and Gruff will automatically update to have those features embedded in him. So that way he always is up to date, and I don't have to redo things every time I want to add something to the file. So basically, it doesn't have to be done when you first put it into Character Animator. You can continually update and work on it and work between the two programs to finalize your character, which is great. So let's say, for example, I wanted Gruff to have a robot arm. This is completely hypothetical. I don't think that'll happen. 10 episodes on the line, who knows? What if I wanted Gruff to have a robot arm and I didn't do that originally? Well, if I were to take it from Procreate, Gruff normally, and I rigged him and I made him all into this puppet who can move around and dance. If I wanted to add the arm later and I did it from Procreate, then he wouldn't retain that. He wouldn't retain all of the rigging. That's why in this file, you'll see Gruff only get to 1 point. And if this sounds confusing, don't worry, you might understand better as we go further. Gruff only gets so far in Procreate is my point. Once I got into Photoshop, I then realized that the Photoshop memory portion, right, the retaining of that data, was important. So the rest of Gruff, all the fine tuning, all the mouth shapes, a lot of that major detail I did in Photoshop. For future characters, I did most of it in Procreate because I prefer drawing in Procreate, and I learned where the limits had to fall off, basically, as far as when I transferred. Because essentially, once you go into Character Animator with your first file, let's say from Procreate, you can't go back. You're going to have to redo your rig every single time. So Gruff only gets to a certain part as far as the time lapse is concerned, but we'll talk about the variances from here to there because there's a stark contrast. As you would have seen, Gruff doesn't look anything like this necessarily in all of the fine tuning of his features. So this is Gruff as he stands. This is the final version of him as he left Procreate. Now the fun begins. So this is Gruff in Photoshop, and you can see on my tablet down below, and I'll be overlaying this for you so you can see it a little bit better. This is Gruff in Photoshop. You can see I can zoom in, zoom out as you're seeing right now. He looks very different to what you just saw, but I want to go over first how all of this becomes an animatable character. Okay, let's go into that. As you can see on your screen, you'll see Gruff moving around. He's talking with my voice, maybe not perfectly in sync, but you can also see me up in the top corner. Up here we have a calorie button. When I press this, I'm going to look at the screen instead of looking at the mic so that I can animate him a little bit better, but there we go. You see it outlines my face. I've got green around my face right now. So if I open my eyes, Gruff opens his eyes. If I lift my eyebrows, you can see he flops, he moves all around, side to side, up and down, every which way. So Gruff's changed a lot between episodes 1 and 2. I actually extended his body quite a bit and made him a little bit longer compared to episode 1, or kind of the intro episode, because I wanted to be more proportionally in scale when I made his standing posture, which I'll show you probably here in just a little bit. But first things first, this is Gruff. So his arms are draggable. He's got little draggable things in his arms. That's really easy. There's nothing crazy there. But otherwise, he moves around, things animate all naturally because I've rigged it to do so. Let's talk about his features and then we'll get into how this all works, okay? So this is him in his base form. I can change things, right? So if I want to turn his hooves, I can turn his hooves. That's with a keyboard press. If I press A, I can make the arms long and I can still turn his hooves. Now, those are also draggable, so I can move them around and wave them and hey, how's it going? I can set these to animatable things where like I record it and then I could play it back so I don't have to move it manually every time with the mouse, as you can see the mouse on the screen here too. What else can Gruff do? Well, he has different expressions and faces. So I can start here with little thin eyes where he's more scared. I can do crazy evil eyes like this, as was in the first episode. I can do sweating, especially with those eyes. Oh, it's scary. I can have his arms in like this, where he's more sweet and sincere. I can put headphones on him. That's when he's like in his managerial role when he's talking things out. I can give him a little notepad. Each of these arms are movable. And I can move the little, pencil and everything around. And then I have a cross time. I also have a blink. I put that on a button as well. You can set blink where it automatically blinks based on your blinks, but I wanted to have more control. So that way when I recorded, I didn't have to worry about blinking at weird times or anything. Because this does, as you see, if you see me moving and him moving, when I record this, I record it live. It's capturing my face. So you can do it all at once, but it's much better and you have more control if you break it out into individual layers. So what else do we have? We have a sign. The sign I can move around. He actually has no arms behind there. Don't pay attention to that. That's movie magic. And those are the base components of Gruff. I also have a open mouth and a smile. I put those on buttons too, just to prevent it from happening naturally. Because sometimes if this green mouth isn't linked on me properly, it won't link on him properly, and he'll smile at weird times when I'm not trying to have him smile. But just to show you what this looks like in its final form, I'm going to play you a few seconds of Gruff talking from the last episode. So let's watch that.
Hi everybody, and welcome to... Well, it's really nice to meet you, Mr. Dog. You run into the garage, but you're suddenly trapped and unable to escape.
All right, so those are a few examples of Gruff from the last episode. As you can see, he's base here. Now, I could do different camera tricks inside of here where I can zoom in and out and do things like that. But let's break down how this works. So I'm going to pull it up here, and then I'm going to pop Gruff down, and you can see all of these things over here. All right, what are all these things? So we have different draggings, we have different eyes, different mouths. So every time something happens, I have to manually trigger it. So if I zoom in, let's go to this first line that you just heard. All right, so this is Gruff just talking. These are the mouth shapes. So you see there's an A, an S, an E, an F, an E, so on and so forth. And these are used to generate his mouth flaps for every different syllable he says. So I've isolated the mouth to show you how I start this process. So this is where it starts.
And welcome to...
That is fine. That takes a really long time. It's the most tedious part of making a character like this, but it is interesting. So that's where it starts. It starts with those mouth shapes. Once I have the mouth shapes locked in, then what I want to do generally is I want to go onto the eyes. I want to make sure that he's looking in the right directions because that informs how his body is going to move. You say a lot with your eyes. So if you're scared, you might look away. If you're thinking, you might look up to the side. You might look directly at camera if you want to be having a funny moment or if you want to be more direct, or you might be looking at a person or two people is, for example, for this scene. So if I turn the eyes on, now you can see mouth with eyes. This is the second layer.
Hi everybody, and welcome to...
Now that one's relatively boring, right? Because he's literally just talking to camera. But what if we go further down? Here is the second dialogue.
Well, it's really nice to meet you, Mr. Dog.
You see how he looks down here?
Well, it's really nice to...
Right, that shows his insecurity. And we want to have that play up when we are doing a scene to show the emotion of the character. Now, what comes next? Next, then I generally like to incorporate the head, because when the head moves, it's also attached to the body. I have this character set to 2 different trackers. What does that mean? So if I zoom out and go back to Gruff, this is what he does, right? He moves all around. You see his head turn and his body. It's 2 separate things, but let me show you that more directly, okay? Now this is gonna look really, really weird because it's detaching his head from his body, but Gruff has 2 trackers. So if I turn my head, his head turns, but if I move my body, he's fully detached from his body, right? It's entirely independent. And the reason we have an independent is so that I can control the body secondarily. If I didn't have it as 2 different components, then when I turned my head, his whole body would want to turn. Now, if I turn it back on, see, I move and the body turns, but I can still turn my head independent of the body moving. So that's how the body and the face tracking works together, and you can incorporate that to have 2 multiple layers of tracking. So it's not just head, it's not just body, I get both. So let's go back to how we go into the next layer of recording. Now that we have the eyes and we have the mouth, we will turn on face, right? Here's what face looks like.
Well, it's really nice to meet you, Mr. Dog.
Right, you can see he moves around a lot. Now ignore the multiple arms, but here's what he looks like in that line again from further out.
Well, it's really nice to meet you, Mr. Dog.
You can see all the play within his upper body and his legs. So even as he moves around, right, his legs are moving because I've rigged it so that everything is proportionally connected. So once we have that, what comes next? Well, then I like to do the arm positions. So generally sitting, this is what he looks like, but here is Gruff with his arms attached to that same bit of dialogue.
Well, it's really nice to meet you, Mr. Dog.
So instead of his arms sitting naturally like this, I've then linked his arms to be in a certain position. Now, that's a relatively simple one, honestly. So if we went to something maybe more complex, all right, this one's a little bit more complex. So let's look at this scene and show you how much more goes into it.
Well, then why Tito, Mr. Courage? Why not something more generic, like a color? Plenty of famous dogs have been named after colors.
So we did a lot. We did many arm swaps. We have blinks, we have looking around, we have dragging of arms. So you can see quickly how this all stacks up and how many layers you might need to account for when you're really animating a puppet. Now this isn't a deep dive into character animator, but I want you to understand what goes in to making this character move around and feel authentic. So this is Gruff. He's gonna look very similar to what you just saw in character animator. But if I go here, you can see on the side, I have this little icon of Gruff, right? If I click it and open it up, inside you see a head, you see a body, and you see a chair. Now I can turn those things off, right? These are layers. So I turn his chair off, he's floating, right? I turn his body off and he's just a head in a chair. So those are the base categories you want to think of Gruff as far as hierarchy, okay? And this is how layering works to create your character. So let's start with the body, because the body is actually simpler than the head. So I'm going to turn off the head for now, which I know is weird, but don't get scared. I'm going to turn off the chair for now. And let's zoom in on his body, right? This is Gruff, and we'll open it up. Now you can see on the side here, there's still a lot of things going on. I have the ability to scroll, which means that there's a lot of layers. Now, many of these are arm swaps because you want to have different poses and options for him to emulate. So, for example, as we saw before, I can turn the crossed arms on. Now, if I wanted the normal arms off, I would just turn those off. Here I'm manually changing these on-off functions, but in Character Animator, I've set it to automatically do it based on the rigging that I designed for the character. So we have arm swaps, right? But what goes into an arm swap? Let's go to this one. So this arm swap shows Gruff holding a pad and a pencil, right? But what happens when I go into this file? Well, we have a left arm and a right arm, okay? That's generic enough, it makes sense. So what if we go into the right arm? Well, I have a shoulder, I have a bicep, and I have a forearm with a folder. Okay, there's layers. If I go into the folder, we have a hoof or a hand, we have a forearm, and we have the folder. So perhaps now it's starting to sink in that everything is an individual layer. But let's go further beyond. Even further beyond! So let's turn off his arms for the time being. You look at Gruff's chest and his torso. Okay, what goes into that, you ask? Let's go to this. This layer is labeled as neck. Now inside the neck, we have the collar. The collar is made of a rope, the metal piece, the front collar, and the side collar. Now, if I turn it off, there's no collar, but as you can see, there's still a back collar up here. The back collar moves independently, so you have layering, and hopefully that makes a little bit of sense as far as everything needs to be structured in a three-dimensional capacity. So when I draw Gruff, that's fine, right? When you saw that time lapse of Gruff in the Procreate file, he's flat. The second and the difficult part is that once you have the character finalized, then you need to chunk it all out or cut it all up to have depth to the character. Everything you see needs to be a new layer. So again, on the body of Gruff, right? This, I have his chest hair, I have his neck, and I have his pecs. But you can still see that there's other material here. So what is that other material? Well, if I go to this main torso piece, I have some scraggles for his belly. I have his belly. I have a middle cavity, and then I have a whole back torso. But you can see there's still little cavities here that make up parts of his shoulder. So everything is an entirely independent layer that makes up the body of Gruff. So now let's really get complicated here, and I hope it's not going too far over your head. I hope in a general sense this makes enough sense. So now we're on to the head. The head is extremely complex. There's a lot of layering that goes on in the head. And actually I'm going to turn off the body and the chair again, just so we have this isolated as best we can. So inside the head, you can see all of these layers. It's a lot. I think let's start not with the mouth, because the mouth gets crazy. So let's turn that off. So right, as you can see, like here's what you see in front, but here's what exists behind.
I'll bring everything you see here, plus everything you don't.
And you are?
I'm Gruff. No last name.
So here's kind of a base outline of what the back of Gruff's head looks like. Everything else that moves on top of it, his eyes, his eyebrows, his nose, his mouth, those are all overlaid objects. This is the base layer. And on top of that, obviously, we have hair that's here, we have horns that are here, we have ears, we have chin. All of those are additionally separate layers. Now, every time Gruff talks, as I mentioned earlier, there's a different mouth shape for a different letter. There's E's, there's F's, there's A's. What does that mean? So let's go into A. So right now he's on a neutral mouth, and I'm going to turn that off. If I go into A, you can see there's a couple things happening. And that's because he actually has two different mouths that make up A. He has 1 and 2. So what that means is the mouth starts here. This is mouth 1. When you start the A sound, it starts this image. It goes over 2 frames though. So this goes first, and then this goes. It's a progression of an opening of an A sound. So every time an A sound comes out, every time he does that. But what goes into a mouth? So we'll go inside, and as you can see, he's got a front nose. He's got an upper crest of his nose. He has his teeth, his front teeth, and inside is the lower mouth, which are the lips, the bottom teeth, the tongue, and the back of the mouth. So as you can see, there are a lot of layers that go into creating a character like this, and it's pretty daunting to figure it all out, but once you do, it's actually pretty straightforward. It just takes a lot of time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn all the layers of Gruff off, and not counting multiple arms, not counting multiple mouth shapes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, show you a quick time lapse of all the layers of Gruff coming up until he gets to full detail. So let's see what happens.
You get it. We both have layers.
Oh, you both have layers. Oh. You know, not everybody like onions.
All right, so those are all the layers of Gruff. I don't know if that makes sense because this is kind of an interesting topic to try to explain for the first time. Hopefully it's working out. But those are all the layers that go into Gruff himself. Now, how do I make those layers come to life? I showed you how I turn them on in Character Animator, but now I want to show you how some of the rigging works. I can't get into it too much detail, but I want to give you a very basic understanding of how some of it works so that your brain can kind of comprehend how all those things move together. So let's jump back into Character Animator to finish this, and then we'll call it a video on Gruff for the day. All right, so we're back in Gruff and Character Animator here in his file. So yeah, let's go into over here on the side. You see where it says Gruff himself, and I'll disappear so you won't see me. How sad. But let's go into Gruff here. And this is Gruff as he looks in Character Animator. He looks pretty much like the Photoshop file of Gruff that we were just taking a peek at. Now on the side we have all the options. So we have head, body, and chair. Where we can start to possibly see how this connects, I think the best example might be in the arms. That might be the most straightforward here. So let me lower the head. Let me go to the right arm. So as you can see, here is the right arm, right? This is it. It says right arm. So what we've done is we've made this arm on the side here. You see there's a crown. We've made this independent so it moves kind of separately or uniquely from the body. What that means is when I move my torso back and forth, it doesn't necessarily reflect the exact movement of the arm. So this is acting as a pivot point. Think of it as the ball and socket in your shoulder. Now inside the arm, I have two different. I have extended and short. Like I said, I can swap between those, and I'm not going to go into that too directly here, but we're on the shortened version of the arm. And as you can see, especially if I open up some of these tags on the side here, here we have the right shoulder, right? Here we have the right elbow, and here we have the right wrist. Now what this allows me to do is that when I use this draggable right here, this draggable icon, and I pull his arm upwards, those are going to act like a wrist, an elbow, and an arm. That means that they're going to pivot off of each other, and they're going to reflect that same kind of movement you would get in an arm. It understands the linkages or the joints that goes between those components. But it doesn't create it like rigidly, if that makes sense. So you see this arm and it treats it like a piece of paper. It doesn't treat it like a sausage, right? It doesn't treat it like a 3D object. So that's where we have to come in. So inside of these, we have different components, and here's a good example. So this is the bicep. Now what I've done is I've taken these sticks, that's how they call them in Character Animator, and I've put these sticks around the components of the arm that I want to retain the rigidity. So I've done it on the outside here. I've done it on both sides of the line here. I have one going through and I have one coming across. This is a learning process. This isn't going to be a deep dive into how this works, but what these individual lines do is they take it from being a very crinkly, flexible piece of paper, and they turn it into this very rigid body so that when I move the arm, it doesn't just totally break and compound on itself. It keeps its form, or the idea of a 3D form, because it's not actually 3D, right? And I'm establishing origin points. So if you see up here, there's an origin. So that means that when it moves, right, because we have a forearm here as well, it knows that everything goes back to the original origin of that object. As you can see here in the shoulder, it origins from up here where it connects to the body, and the lower arm connects to the bottom of the bicep. And obviously inside the lower arm, we then have the same type of components with sticks creating rigidity within that shape. And we have the hooves. There's multiple hooves here, which is why it might look weird. But there's, all kinds of good stuff. Here's the origin for the hoof itself. So that's an example of how this all gets rigged up. But we also have things, for example, if I go to the head. So if I go to the head and I go to the mouth. Now this is interesting, right? See, it says mouth group. On the side, there's a little smiley face, but you see all these labeled shapes, mouth shapes. We have vowels and consonants here. So if I open the mouth on the left, we have A, which corresponds with A. We have D, which corresponds with D. And And what that does is it automatically detects these shapes. So if you name this layer, right, the layer D, then it automatically knows that when I do a D sound, it's going to pull in this shape automatically. So that the software has the software has coding that allows it to help you, but you have to do a lot of manipulation in order for it to work properly. Now, let's go into one final one real quick. Let's look at the eye, because the eye is going to be the most complicated shape to really show you here. And let's go into the right eye, okay? The right eye, as far as layering is concerned, there's a lot of things going on. So for this example is right blink. So if I were to blink, it would know to blink right away. But I've got crazy stuff like this lower eye, right? This lower eye is multiple pieces. And they all work together, and they have different levels of rigidity, they have different origin points, and they have different shapes, and they all have to work together in a way. So for example, when he blinks, these all move. So I'm going to go back to the main puppet, and I'm going to zoom in on his face and allow you to try to see some of what's happening here. And in order to do that, I'm going to turn off the very outer shapes. So I'm going to turn off this big layer, and we're going to turn off the upper eyelid, because I want you to be able to see the eye, and it's a little spooky, so don't get too scared. All right, so here is Gruff. We're back in the scene, and he does look a little bit terrifying. But as you can see, when I open the eye, all of those shapes within are moving. There's this side part. Let me go a little bit closer even here. So there's this side part, which stretches, right? This whole back pink section stretches as well. This shape here in the front slides. Same with this one. Those origin from behind the nose. And you can see on the opposing side how that works, right? They hide behind this lower eyelid so that it looks like a smooth transition. And it's not perfect, but it's come a long way, and it's a very difficult process to figure out how that all is going to work, right? Even this upper eyelid, it stretches, and then it compounds and seals over. All right, it's all functionality, and here's if I move the eye, right? Because I didn't show you that earlier. But look, for example, how the pupil and the iris move left to left, but the highlight stays in the same spot. So that way the eye can move, and it pretends as if there's one light source within the room itself that you're looking at. So yeah, that's hopefully a little bit better understanding of how the shapes overlap and all function with their different stretchiness and firmness. And for example, right, like look how flexible the ears are, but other parts don't really move at all. So, all right, so this is the very last thing I want to share with you. This is an extremely early version of Gruff, still totally not working and broken. His neck's basically bends in the middle and breaks, and his eyes aren't finished, and yeah, it's really early. But I wanted to show you because I want you to see what the beginning looks like, because the beginning is so important. It's always easy to overlook where you started, where you came from, how much work you put in, but it's very important to reflect back and look at that. Oh yeah, and also he didn't even have a name at this point, but that's enough. I digress. Enjoy. All right, his neck's a little broken and a few other things, but what do you think so far? He's pretty expressive, like I said. He looks more like scared and psychotic with like his red eyes. Kind of goofy. I don't know. I've been staring at this for way too long to know if it's even good anymore, so any opinion would be lovely. And if you can think of a name, that would also be cool. But yeah, here you go. Thanks. So that's Gruff. I hope that made sense. I hope it was interesting. Obviously, there's more that goes into it. There's voice acting, right? There's finding the voice for the character
And then turning into Gruff. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fictitious Mockery.
but that's entirely separate. This is how I made the character physically, ground up, drew him, animated him, brought him to life. So I hope you really enjoyed it. There's more in this series to come. I'm going to do one on courage. I'm going to do one for every single character I make, and hopefully they'll be a little bit more succinct, and I think it'll be more interesting because they'll be how I've developed a character that already exists and how I bring that into this concept. But yeah, if you liked it, I'd love any like, comment, or subscription you'd like to provide me. I'd love to hear what you think about it. But yeah, until next time, everybody. See you then. Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, what's up?
This is Gruff, and he says such notable things as... This is Gruff. Fuck you fucking Today we're gonna be doing something a little bit different. I say that every fucking time. And I'm gonna break down today how I made him. So, watch these clips of him, and let's get started. Test, 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 how does the mic sound? Are you serious, Quoth? Uh-huh, yeah, I hear you. We all do.